The most sophisticated AI technologies today are kind of lame in comparison.
Was there a point where you just had enough success that you said, okay, I mastered that?
We literally lobotomize ourselves with stress.
Welcome to the ReeThink Podcast. Today I have Lucia with me. It's very exciting. I'm super excited and stoked to speak to you. Lucia, introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me. So my name is Lucia. I have spent 15 years building tech startups in the enterprise SaaS space. I would say with a reasonable amount of success. Quite a few of them became global market leaders. One turned into a unicorn. And then I decided that it was time for a new chapter. And now I am supporting other leaders to tap into their full potential as an executive coach for breath and other things that allow us to expand our potential.
That's quite a pivot from my perspective, and I'm super interested in your story. I remember the first time we spoke, I was totally intrigued how you come from like the tech space, tech startup, being an entrepreneur and building all these companies together with others, and now doing what you do right now. So can you walk us through?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe to start with, I've always been fascinated with complexity and actively drawn towards complexity, both technological complexity and human complexity. So for me, complexity was always this juicy challenge worth approaching. And so it's what has drawn me into the world of deep tech, particularly in the enterprise space originally, because I felt like it was combining both of the aspects of the technological complexity with, obviously, if you're developing and marketing a deep tech technology, there is a lot of that, but also the interpersonal, the human complexity. You're not just selling to one person, but you're selling to a whole consortium of buyers, maybe 50 buyers who all have their different agendas and different interests. And so navigating that was something very exciting for me. And I would say over time, I actually became more and more interested in the complexity of the human mind. And it started first relatively innocent with an interest in psychology, personality traits, also a little bit of personality pathology. That was something that I've always been very fascinated by. And most of this was driven by the question, why do we do what we do? And then over time, I went deeper down the rabbit hole and I started getting interested in behavioral science and neuroscience. How does the brain actually works, and how does our brain and the state of our brain influence how we think, how we feel, how we behave? And I would say ultimately it morphed into the interest to explore the nature of consciousness itself and how we can expand also our consciousness, what's there beyond our regular perception, what's there beyond our regular emotional experience, what's there beyond our regular cognitive ability. And the deeper I went, the more fascinated I got. And ultimately, I realized that no matter how sophisticated the machines are that we are building today, the human body and brain are so much more sophisticated and such a complex and fascinating system that we are just beginning to understand. I mean, even the most sophisticated AI technologies today are kind of lame in comparison, if we're honest. And so that's kind of how I became interested in technologies that expand our human potential and expand human abilities. And this is also why I understand, for example, breath as a technology, and also meditation as a technology, or somatic practice, yoga as a technology. So on the outside, I think it seems like a very radical career shift from being a tech executive to teaching people how to breathe and teaching people yoga and meditation. But in my mind, it's more of a natural evolution from starting, let's say, with more basic technologies like the regular deep tech, and then diving into the really deep and complex technologies, which is human brain and how we can expand it.
That's so fascinating, and this was also one of the first things where I was like, first time speaking with you, I was like, that sound familiar, because I'm super curious how you started, or what was the driver with you that you started being interested in psychology. Because for me, it was that I was basically very different from from my peers, and I had no understanding why my perception of the world was so vastly different than my peers, and that's why I get like try to understand myself and also others. So that was my starting point, and I, similar like you, I diverged to neuroscience, which is also still a super fascinating field, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. And at the end, you are like automatically drawn to consciousness itself. But I'm curious about how this started, or what was the initiation process that led you from psychology to be just interested in psychology first.
Yeah, I think like there's perhaps some overlaps with the kind of experience that you had, or with the drivers that led you to the exploration. I also always felt like I was very different, and I have never been diagnosed, but probably today you would place me somewhere on the autistic spectrum. And so it was not easy for me to naturally understand human behavior. Like, it was
Mm-hmm.
all very strange to me, and I
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, it was difficult for me to understand social conventions, and
Mm-hmm.
why do you call people on their birthdays? I literally didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in the first step it was a lot of like a lot of what was driving me was the attempt also to try to fit in
Yeah.
in a sense.
Yeah.
But then it went like, I would say, like much farther beyond, and kind of like, as kind of like going back to the question again, why do we do the things we do? What is actually driving us, and where is this whole thing, consciousness, actually coming from?
Yeah. Yeah, that's also like a question that in the last, I say, maybe 5 years are like very deeply intrigued by it. And just recently, and I shared this book with you, I came across Christoph Koch. And what is so fascinating about him is that he is a like world-renowned neuroscientist, and he's one of the few that is like really actually, let's say, he describes it the following: there's like two different like perceptions of, or in science, discussions going on. One is like the consciousness is a byproduct of the brain, and then we have the other, more, let's say, from the spiritual aspect, that that consciousness is something primary, or the brain channels consciousness. And he's one of the first that is, he comes from neuroscience, but he clearly says like consciousness is something totally different, and that's why AI will never be sentient in that sense, because it's something totally inherently different, and you can couple it from intelligence, because most of the time consciousness is related to intelligence. But he says like, why do we have these moments where we are conscious but we don't have any self anymore, and all these different things? And this makes me so fascinated by that he's like really trying to bridge that gap between science and what we have from ancient spirituality.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think this resonates a lot with me, and I'm not actually familiar with his work, but the way
Mm-hmm.
you're summarizing it really rings a bell for me, and it's something that I find very interesting. How, like, I don't necessarily think like all of the science, but most of the scientific consensus is
Mm-hmm.
still focusing on this interpretation that consciousness originates from this biological form. And it's in a very stark contrast with how actually all of the ancient traditions describe that. And for me, like the point that is, or like that at least warrants more curiosity about that, is that all of these ancient wisdom traditions came up with that understanding completely independently from each other, centuries apart in completely different cultural context, geographical locations. So it doesn't seem for me to fit the idea of a coincidence. It's not like the world was globalized back then. And so I think like that's one reason why I am personally leaning more towards the interpretation of the ancient wisdom traditions. And the second reason being my own first person experience from deeper meditative states. I think it's a thing that is very hard to describe to someone who has not experienced that. And I genuinely think that it is not possible to convince someone that has not experienced that this is the actual nature of reality. And at the same time, if you have been in that expansive state beyond the boundaries of self, even just for a fleeting moment, it's something that stays with you and you can't just undo it. And it's so obvious. And it's kind of an interesting thing because for me, it is so obvious. And at the same time, I wouldn't know how to explain it to anyone who's not experienced that. And I wouldn't even try to convince anyone of that, which is why, like I generally don't enter discussions on that topic because I'm like, it's like, it's like how do you explain love to someone who has never experienced it, or how do you convince someone that has never experienced love that it even exists? It's not possible. Either you feel it or you don't.
Yeah, I agree with you. And there's even some experience where I believe it is not really important to really convince anybody, because the crazy thing about like being conscious, we all are conscious, but it's always a projection. Because I know I'm conscious, but it's my subjective or experience, and I can just assume that you have a similar experience like myself. So there's no difference in my belief of what consciousness is for me and how I experience it. And because there is like no point of reaching a conclusion with somebody else, because it will not change my experience, right?
Correct. And I think this is also where I think like perhaps you start getting into the territory of realizing that there is no such thing as the universal truth, right? Like you and I can have two very different perspectives and opinions on a particular subject.
Yeah.
And there doesn't need to be a resolution in terms of you are right and I'm wrong, or vice versa, because both of our experiences can be valid and real at the same time.
Exactly.
And at the same time, none of them is exclusively true.
Yeah. Yeah, and this reminds me, and that's the fascinating thing when you have like the perspective of psychology or neuroscience is this reminds me to something Lisa told me. She is the author of the book Neurowell, and she explained me like your perception is basically what happens with when an experience come in, and then you have the thalamus, which is like your database of experience, and then you have the amygdala, which is basically the amplifier of emotions. And when you have like a certain perception, and then the input goes through the thalamus, and it registers maybe a certain experience, and then it's amplified what emotions you have associated with that experience that you register. And so you can have vastly different experiences based on one outcome. And that's so fascinating to understand. Like every experience is uniquely subjective, although we can experience everybody the same, but it's totally different. And that's so interesting that you have still like this framework of scientifically sound that is what is happening in the brain on the one hand, but on the other hand, like consciousness is something totally different. And from my perspective and also my experience, I would say that's something that is channeled by the brain. But at this point of time, it's not proven. And to be honest, I don't care.
I completely resonate with that.
Great. Great. And what I'm curious also about is when was this pivot point from like running tech startup and now noticing I want to do something different? Was there like a point where you just had enough success that you said, okay, I mastered that, I'm looking for something else? Or was there a challenging moment in your life that led you to change something dramatically?
I think it was a bit of a combination of both, I would say. Um, and it felt a bit of a kind of like a natural evolution over time, where I would say for the first probably 10 years of my career, I was a crazy workaholic. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like I would say like a natural part of my being that when I point my mind to something, it's like I became obsessively fixated on that. And it's actually hard for me to slow down. And so I've been working like that for about 10 years. And along the way, of course, experienced some of the detrimental effects of chronic stress on my body, on my well-being, also on my cognitive performance from racing thoughts, depression, anxiety, immune system collapse, being hospitalized a couple of times, and so on. But to be fair, none of that even made me think about pausing. It was just like a side effect that, like I'll deal with it. And like I used to say, I can sleep when I'm old. And so that was my approach. And then when I turned about 30, there was a period in my life that I would say was a bit of a breaking point. It did not necessarily originate from my relationship with work, even though I would say that probably this crazy workaholic phase in my life has likely eroded my emotional resilience to a certain degree. But then there was a traumatic experience that has thrown me into this phase of struggling with which is basic things really, and made me acutely suicidal actually
Wow.
for an extended period of time. And it was like I was experiencing like all of these I would say aftermath effects of trauma, like constant flashbacks, racing thoughts. I couldn't sleep. My mind would never stop. And it was not just that I was constantly thinking or in these looping thoughts, but most of it was emotionally very uncomfortable. So there was this like constant backdrop of anguish and constant torment, really, to a point where after a couple of months, I was like, I don't know how much longer I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was what actually led me to my first immersive meditation, breath, yoga training. It was actually a teacher training as a bit of a last ditch effort to get my brain under control, because it
Yeah.
felt really out of control. I felt like I had no agency at all over what was
Wow.
happening in my head, and it was just torture. And I still remember this like it was yesterday. And by the way, I've done all kinds of different things before. I obviously went to therapy, and it's like all of that like didn't help.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I'm in this like retreat, and I remember it was about maybe 1 week into the retreat, and we were doing this very simple meditation that goes hand in hand with slowing down your breath, like super simple. And then about 10 minutes into that meditation, I just remember like all of this like anguish that was there constantly for months and months and months, like just dissolved. And it was like 1 second and it was all gone. And I experienced just this like silence and a sense of peace and just like this spaciousness. And it was such a big relief. And I was just like, oh, this is like so good. And at that point, I had never even considered that I could get back into that state even for a moment. And so I remember this very vividly because that's kind of what really gave me hope that I
Yes.
can get myself out of this hole. And so that was really the starting point for me for a deeper exploration and going deeper into the practice of breath and the practice of meditation, and also in combination with somatic practice with yoga. So this was back in 2020. And when I came back, I kind of returned back to my normal executive career. I got myself back together. I was able to function. And I stayed in this executive track for a couple of years after that. But I have continued going deeper and deeper into this exploration of consciousness, spiritual exploration. And as I went deeper into that, I started feeling a more intense need to show up more authentically and to act more in alignment with my intuition, and to also have more freedom in relation to what I do, to have more time and space for deep work, and more time and space for depth in general, which all of these things are kind of luxuries that you don't really have as an executive with, venture capital investors on board and reporting to your board. It's like the system is kind of wired for speed and for scale and for constant urgency. And it's something that I actually enjoyed a lot for 15 years. But at some point I felt like going beyond that. And I realized that it is not necessarily the type of environment where I will be able to access my most expansive abilities and to explore what these actually are and how how deep I can go into those. And that's kind of where then the career pivot, I would say, happened, coming from this need to explore my own human potential first and foremost, and then also provide guidance for other leaders for how they can explore and expand their own human potential.
That's very profound. And one thing that comes up for me is, in it sounds a bit ambivalent in that sense that on the one hand you need more space in order to like totally be able to fulfill your potential, versus the career path or the way you were working before, that you were like putting in a lot of hours. Everything is catered towards speed and scale. And maybe can you unpack that, how this is not ambivalent and why it allows you to really expand you as a person and also expand your natural gifts in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting tension to explore, because even after I got this like very clear intuitive guidance from inside to shift my career path, I have to say, like, there was a lot of doubt coming from my thinking minds, like, are you crazy? What are you doing? Because of, I think, how we are conditioned to perceive ourselves, how we construct our own identity, and what do we label as meaningful or significant. And if I'm not, like having a team of, I don't know, 100 people and responsibility for so and so many million or hundreds of millions of euros, or building billion-dollar companies, then I'm insignificant. And so it definitely like took a little bit of deconstructing for me on that side to be able to actually detach myself from these, I would say, external drivers, towards something that is more emerging from inside, and where I'm orienting myself more towards what feels aligned, what feels resonant, what gives me a feeling of expansion in my body, rather than external metrics and goals and how many million euros of revenue and how many people are reporting to me and like what magazine am I on the cover of, etc. And like I wouldn't necessarily say that I have like completely finished that transition, but I
Hmm.
would say that I'm well on my way towards, I think, just a more authentic way of being.
Yeah, yeah. I can resonate with that a lot. One thing is also, I mean, it's on the one hand, and I can just speak for myself. I think it's part of the human experience to have ambition, to be effective, and to see that others can recognize your work. On the other hand, I also understand totally what you're speaking from, because it's almost like you having a different fuel source, which means you cannot end up being on a cover because of your of the things you have done, but it's not that you have to do it or that's significant. It comes more from an intrinsic need of like the expression of your highest potential, which comes from within. And it's maybe the outcome is similar or kind of similar, but from my perspective, this is completely two different things. And I had also these different modes of operations, how I was working. And for me, it was basically changing the fuel source from, let's say, to use an analogy, caffeine to maybe something that is more sustainable, like matcha, for instance.
Yeah, I love that framing. I think that's a very, very nice way to put it. And I agree with you that it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to like give up, like all of the luxuries or achievements, etc. I think it's more that they become more of a byproduct
Mm-hmm.
of you pursuing your purpose and acting in alignment with your core, your essence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just something that emerges naturally, but it is not the ultimate goal. And I mean, like, I'll still need to see as I go deeper into my own journey. But my strong sense is that, ironically, the more you let go of the fixation of that and just orient yourself towards alignment with your core, the more likely you are to actually not only match some of the conventional success metrics,
Mm-hmm.
but succeed them.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I think you get into a place where you become much more ambiguous about that, where it's like, okay, it's like it's not the main thing
Yeah.
that is also fueling your self-worth.
Yeah, I see that. Do you have like maybe a concrete example of how you did things in the past, or this was the results, and how you, for instance, are able to succeed in that particular thing far more greater than before because you are like it comes from within. Let's make an example like writing, for instance, that you maybe in the past had a hard time writing, although you were quite successful and efficient, but now it's like it comes with ease.
Oh, 100%. I would say like the way that I was operating before was very OKR driven.
Yeah,
Also, obviously, in the business context, I do
yeah,
think that, like, especially in the startup world, it's still the golden standard, I guess,
yeah.
to direct a company. But also in my personal life, I was OKR driven. I would, like do my OKRs at the beginning of the year and then revisit them quarterly, etc. And like, set ambitious goals and then bottom up, like try to work my way towards that, put together a plan, etc., etc. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I think it also has served me quite well for quite a significant period of time. And then, like, at some point, I just felt like I evolved beyond that
Mm-hmm.
to honestly just following my intuition in the moment. So I don't do any OKRs anymore.
Mm-hmm.
At least there's not this kind of top-down level of planning. Like, this is where I want to get. I don't know. I want to get to 100,000 followers or whatever, and
Yeah.
this is how I get there. It's more like there is a vision that I have, and that vision has also specific, perhaps milestones or components to it. but it's not a vision that I come up with when I sit down and I'm like, okay, like let me think about my vision.
Yeah.
It's not fundamentally it's not a product of the thinking process. It's more something that just drops, and where it drops from, I don't know. It does feel like something that I'm just receiving as opposed to something that I am producing. And then the way I see my role is more in this constant calibration, keeping my mind-body system in a state that is aligned enough so that I can be perceptive enough, and at the same time cultivate this discernment about this thing, this insight, this intuition that I'm receiving. Does it actually register in an expansive way in my body? Does it actually feel true? Or is it something and I'm just like maybe just like making it up in my mind, and it's like a subtle way of my thinking mind to pose as something else and then plant this thing.
Okay.
So I think for me it's more about the calibration of the mind-body system,
Yeah.
and about cultivation of discernment to be able to navigate these subtle differences in resonance.
You mentioned something very briefly, so about intuition and the signals of your body, and I have seen or read that you talk about like intelligence is an embodied process. So and maybe you can touch on that, what you mean by that, because I'm super curious about your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite topics currently. So when I talk about intelligence as an embodied process, I'm really questioning this very Western assumption that intelligence is this thing that kind of lives exclusively in the brain, and that the body is just a vehicle, kind of a taxi that carries it around. When in reality, your brain is really only one node in a much larger intelligent system that includes your entire nervous system, your heart, your gut, your muscles, your fascia, and so on. And we now know that there are semi-autonomous neural networks in the gut and the heart that make local decisions without asking the brain for permission. So not all of the decisions in our body are made by the brain. And at the same time, your brain is completely dependent on data coming from the body, because the body is your perception instrument. Like the brain is like a blind king, like living here completely in the dark. It has no direct interface with reality, right? Except the body. And so the brain doesn't know anything the body doesn't tell it. And if that input is distorted because your system is out of balance, your cognition obviously gets distorted too. Bad input leads to bad output. Just like the most sophisticated AI model can't produce anything accurate if you feed it low quality data. Right? So like, I think this makes sense to everyone. It makes a difference whether you feed your AI model peer-reviewed science or random Reddit threads, which I think is actually like most of the data that ChatGPT is operating on.
I mean, I was also thinking that this must be the case just because of the end of the day, you need normalized data in order to train that. And that's also something that was one of the first thing that I was discussing with a person that is building simulations, and I was like asking him rather like very particular questions. And one thing that he also explained me in very detail is that the human mind is like amazingly good at learning something, a new skill, based on very little data. So we can, based on the data or based on the skill we have, we can use that data and have minimal new data in order to do something completely new. And so, as an example, when I can walk, I probably have not a hard time to learn to run. But for a machine system or the neural networks that we have right now, machine learning, they need a lot of training data, like a lot. And this is like one of the biggest problems. And wink, wink, it's also probably one of the biggest business opportunities going forward when you have like a system that can normalize data and bring it from different data source that is organized different to one data source, or create a kind of half synthetic data or whatever it is to feed all these systems, because they are like really dependent on huge, vastly amount of quality data in order to get a right output. But coming back to what you wanted to describe with embodied
and I mean, like the human brain might be better at doing more from less data, but it still depends on the quality of the input. So that's one thing. But then also on a physiological level, the state of your body literally changes what your brain can do. Like on a physiological level, if your nervous system is in a survival state, blood flow and oxygen get pulled away from the prefrontal cortex. And that is the part you need for complex reasoning, for creativity, for long-term thinking. And the blood gets redirected towards systems that keep you alive in the short term, that operate in the slightly more primitive ways.
Yeah.
So it's not just I feel stressed, it's kind of the hardware for the high quality thinking is temporarily offline. It's like pulling the plug on your desktop computer. The lights are out, no one's home.
Yeah.
and so that's also something to consider. And then I think there's the question of where our real decision-making power sits. And rough estimates from science suggest that while conscious thought can handle only around 10 bits of information per second, our broader brain-body system is processing millions of bits through these fast nonverbal channels: sensation, posture, micro muscle tensions, heart rhythms. And so it's important to realize that most of what shapes our reality is not happening in the little strip of consciousness that we narrate in our head. And Antonio Damasio's somatic marker hypothesis speaks directly to this. It says that the emotional processes that show up as bodily signals, say the tightening in your chest or the drop in your stomach, they are not a nuisance. They are essential inputs to rational decision making. And science has shown that people with higher interoceptive awareness, meaning people who are better at feeling what's happening inside their bodies, consistently make better, more adaptive decisions. And we can train that awareness, and training that awareness actually improves decision quality. And so it's kind of ironic that pure logic that tries to ignore the body signals actually doesn't make you more rational. It tends to make you less rational and less effective. And so I think if we're serious about exploring our human potential, we have to move beyond this reductive brain as the exclusive seat of intelligence story, because genuine human intelligence is embodied intelligence. It's a distributed process across brain, body, and nervous system. And our job is to learn how to listen and integrate the whole system.
I totally agree with you, and this also drives back the point that I have received from two different persons. So one is that it was basically in a book. I'm not sure or don't remember the book, but it was basically trying to understand that certain traders are the best traders are very acute in understanding their heart rate. So, and by understanding their heart rate and that they are basically in a fight or flight situation because of a trade they made, that they adjust their decision making. So it's exactly what you have described so far. And one other point was also by Michael Menino, who was also on the pod with his a business partner Irvin, and they are creating a video platform that is able to measure the biomarkers for interpersonal synchrony. So it's basically this how people can work together, or this like chemistry effect. So they make it measurable. And one thing that he particularly pointed me towards is that he had a TEDx talk on basically the brain and the body, and he said like the brain is evolved to navigate complex 3D environments, and so all the signals coming in is important information in order to navigate the 3D complex environment we are in. So I think that's also, for me, this is the new paradigm. And I had also a discussion with the movement coach. He tells me, and this is like also a story that we all kind of know, that like juggling, for instance, like makes you a genius in a way. And he says the same in a way, that when you use your body and complex things like that needs coordination, that helps you to have a better integrated brain connection, in particular with the two hemispheres and all these different things, and it's interesting that we now the science is catching up to things that kind of were obvious in a way for certain people, but it's now that we have the science maybe to really say, okay, that's true.
Yeah, it's like I would say if you are somewhat reasonably connected to your body, you can feel all of these things. Like when we were talking about the traders, by the way, I love this research because these are people on Wall Street. And they're following their gut instinct. And these are the top performing people. They perform better than the ones who don't. But if you're connected, then you know that this is a reliable signal to follow. And the same with this interpersonal chemistry. I mean, you can feel it.
Yeah.
I'm feeling it right now. and the same with, I think with the complex movement, it's just like you can feel it, you can notice it. But I think the challenge is when you are disconnected, and I think a lot of people are, just because of a barrage of chronic stress and overstimulation and constant urgency that we are bombarded with. Like once you are disconnected, you get disconnected from all of these signals. And then it's a little tricky to get back on track there, which is also why, for example, I don't use any tracking devices anymore. But I did use them for a long time, and I found them very helpful to help me navigate, because I was receiving zero signals from my body. Like I was completely cut off from anything that was going on underneath my shoulders. And so having the data, like how you slept and if you're getting sick and what's your HRV, is actually helpful. And at the same time, I feel like once you move into the territory that you can feel it, that this inherent feedback that you're getting from your body in every moment is so much more precise than your aura ring. And then you actually don't need it because the metrics are quite trivial in many ways.
Yeah, I can see that. This reminds me also my own evolution, because at some point, I think this was also end of my 20s, beginning of my 30s, I was maybe sleeping at maybe 4 hours a day, something around those lines. And somewhere I read that this might be not very good for my long-term health, and in particular also for my brain, because I was obsessed like optimizing my cognition in that sense. And then at some point I thought, okay, then I probably need to track it to really understand how bad my sleep was. Exactly what you described, because I was not really in touch with my body back then. But this led me to the understanding what was going on. At some point, I felt like I don't want to use it anymore. I want to use I want to use my bodily sensation. Nevertheless, I still believe like there is an application for these devices. And but I think also just as a intermediate or a step where you like have the help to understand your bodily sensation, and you have the help to synchronize it with your own sensation in a way. And I think that is something that I believe there is this application where it makes sense from me personally, but going forward I also question whether this like is the end solution.
And that's pretty much in line with how I see the role of technology in general in helping us expand our human ability. I do think it makes a lot of sense to use technology as a scaffolding to help us perhaps re-access some of the abilities that we have lost because of the chronic stress, for example. And so the Aura Ring perhaps is a scaffolding to help you get back in tune with your body. And at the same time, I don't think it should be a forever crutch, because frankly, you don't need it. At some point, you don't need it. It's like also when you break your leg, like, yes, crutches are a good thing
Yeah.
up to the point where you can walk again, but you don't want to like stick to them for the rest of your life just because you had a broken leg at one point. And I think it's the same with these devices. And I also think you totally can overdo it. And I think there are a couple of prominent examples of people, I'm not naming any names.
But I think everybody knows who we
I
talk
think, yes, and
thinking about.
I'm not saying any names. So I think it's a balance.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And one thing now, I mean, talking to you now, for me, it makes totally sense that now you help others like entrepreneurs, founders, to increase their HRV, stress resilience and creativity, intuition, and in order that they have a better help with decision making. Now it makes totally sense. But can you walk us through how you do that, and in particular what the role of the central nerve system plays? Because we talked about the central nerve system a couple of times, but I'm curious how you see it, or how you are using it, and why it's integral for today's day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. So usually I start with a simple truth, and it's what I already talked about just now. Chronic stress is bad. It's the enemy of cognitive performance. And I think this is like what also piques the interest of a lot of business leaders, because we all know it's bad for our health.
Yeah.
And for our well-being. But a lot of high performers kind of accept that as the price of success. And I did too in my past. Like I shared before, it's like just because I was miserable and constantly stressed and depressed and hospitalized a couple of times, that was no reason for me to slow down. I was like, I can sleep when I'm old, right? But what I think many high performers don't realize is that they're not just sacrificing their health and well-being, they're actually sacrificing their ability to think clearly, to decide wisely, and to be creative. And this is because under chronic stress, the brain literally reconfigures around survival. And our amygdala, which is our threat detector, becomes hyperactive. Our perception of danger amplifies. And the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that we need for complex thinking, emotional regulation, also creativity, gets completely disrupted to the point where if you're stressed enough, it's like almost like a little prefrontal lobotomy. We literally lobotomize ourselves with stress. And so people go into tunnel vision, rigid black and white thinking, you get brain fog. You lose access to what you actually know, and it's kind of like turning into a more primitive version of yourself exactly when you need your most evolved capacities, right? Like you bring the Neanderthal back online. That's not what's gonna, like help you navigate this board meeting situation. And I think the bad news here is that for most executives, chronic stress is a constant backdrop. there's a good news too, though, which is that a big chunk of this stress-induced decline is preventable. And the lever that we can work with is the autonomic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
That's the background system that governs our heart rate, our breathing, our digestion, basically all of our physiology. And that fundamentally also determines how you think, how you feel, and how you behave in every moment.
Mm-hmm.
And most people probably heard this by now. It has two main branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is kind of the gas pedal. It mobilizes you for action.
Mm-hmm.
And the parasympathetic is the brake, which brings calm, relaxation, and recovery. What a lot of leaders still don't understand yet is that peak performance actually follows an inverted U curve when it comes to the activation of our nervous system. So with too little activation, we are too flat and too lethargic to perform well. But with too much activation, especially chronic activation, we get too chaotic and we lose access to our best cognitive abilities.
Yeah.
And so you want to aim for that sweet spot in between the state of the so-called calm alertness. And that's where you can access flow, creativity, intuition, and your best decision making. And the challenge is, of course, that daily life, especially for executives, constantly drags people out of that nice sweet spot into sympathetic overdrive,
Yes.
which is this fight or flight mode as a default setting. And the thing is that you can't willpower your way out of it. You can't just push through it because the autonomic nervous system doesn't respond to mental commands. You can't just decide to change your heart rate or cortisol levels because you want to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the tricky part, but we do have a very elegant backdoor into this system, and that backdoor is our breath. And it sounds very trivial and almost too good to be true, but breath is the one piece of this system that we can consciously control. You can choose to slow down your breath. And when you intentionally slow down and deepen your breathing, you send a safety signal through the vagus nerve, which shifts the whole system towards more parasympathetic dominance, so this relaxation, the calm response. And then your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops, your heart rate variability improves, and your prefrontal function comes back online. And the amazing thing is that you don't need an hour on a cushion to get this effect. There are studies clearly showing that just a few minutes of slow breathing at around 6 breaths per minute can measurably shift your autonomic balance literally within minutes. And so in practice, I teach executives to use their breath as a cognitive performance tool. Before a high-stakes meeting or investor pitch, just 2 to 5 minutes of slow-paced breathing can bring them into that calm alertness zone. So they walk in regulated, present, and able to access their full cognitive capacity. Or during the day, we work with micro protocols that they can do anytime, anywhere, in an elevator, between Zoom calls, or even in a meeting while someone else is speaking, especially when you're in a tense meeting and you need to keep it together, right? And you can use it without anyone noticing. And the cool thing is that over weeks, the practice doesn't just help them in the moment. It also shifts their baseline from wired and anxious to more grounded and clear most of the time. And that's fundamentally why breathwork and nervous system regulation are at the core of my work. It's not just about becoming Zen as an aesthetic. It's really about reclaiming the part of your intelligence that chronic stress steals from you.
Yeah.
And so your HRV, your resilience, your creativity, your intuition, and your decision-making ability actually match the level of responsibility that you are carrying as a leader.
Yeah, I think that is so profound. Also, a lot of things that you're describing also reminds me on certain things I had in the past before I was like doing breath work on a regular basis, and also working semantically with with my body, because there are these moments where you feel like so tense that the outcomes or everything that comes towards you feel like you have to carry maybe a whole building on top of yourself, and it feels really like you want to run away. So at least for me, and I noticed the more that I do did breath work, the more I felt like I can handle these things, and I didn't have this intense triggers. And one particular thing that I came across also lately, and this was first just based on my experience, but now I even got like written documentation on that, is also that the central nervous system will also regulate through sharing yourself authentically. And that was something that I was not aware of, but I was doing this in a men's circle where we reflect on upon like difficult situation, whether it's about purpose, relationship, or fatherhood, whatever it is. And I really learned to show up as my totally authentic self, like something that I think in this modern lifestyle we are not used to that anymore, because there's so much shame and judgment and all these different things upon you, because everybody wants to be appear perfect. Maybe this is also a side effect of social media, although we might not use it, right? But we all feel it because it's part of the like public or collective consciousness in that sense. And funny enough, then I came across this book where they describe how this can resolve trauma, and I feel that too. And I think it's also like the combination of that, like having my breathwork practices, which I feel like help me to expand my, let's say, my ability to carry complex things, or like emotional complex things. And one thing where I totally like observe where it helps me is like all of a sudden I still like I always had a good memory, but at some point I really notice how much my memory increases, and how much I was more and more aware about my patterns. Now, this was even uncanny how effective I became, like understanding what is going on with me and what is triggering me, or what patterns were like starting to evolve within me in real time. And I was like, that's odd. Something happened clearly, and this creates for me the way I describe it is more presence, and with more presence you have like more ability to change your behavior and to modulate your behavior in a way that you want.
Wow, that is so cool. And I actually never heard about this research, but I think I'll have to go and dig into it after we
Yeah,
finish here today, because I
yeah,
find it so fascinating, and it really aligns with also my own intuitive understanding. And I think this is also tying back to what I was saying before about this emerging need for me to align myself more with just this kind of inner core, inner essence that I'm feeling. Almost, I would say, to a point where, first it started as kind of a calling or a pull,
mm-hmm.
but at some point it became very, I would say, almost like impossible to compromise on. In
I
the
got that.
sense that, like, for me, for example, this career transition, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a choice. Like, the choice was really not there. It's like there was no option for me to go back to what was before, because my body wouldn't let me. There was like so much dissonance in my
Mm-hmm.
body
Yeah,
towards doing anything else than this thing that
yeah,
it just became like it wouldn't have been sustainable. And I think it's kind of I sense that when you start getting more attuned to also the internal sensations in your body, you start noticing these subtle differences. And then when you maybe even like first accidentally tap into this state of alignment and expansion and regulation, and you're like, oh, this feels very nice. You don't want to go back to that thing before. It's just like, it's just not an option. It's almost like, I don't know, if you have eaten at McDonald's your whole life, and then you come to like a nice 3 Michelin star restaurant, you're like, whoa, this is the real thing. Like, I'm not going back to McDonald's.
Yeah. I can see that. I can clearly see that. You have a very interesting Substack called the Perception Lab, and you talk a lot about intuition. And I'm curious about your definition of intuition, because this was like the first time I saw this distinct, because I think everybody has an understanding what intuition is, but you had when I remember correctly, like a 3-layer description of intuition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is again one of my favorite topics to talk about. So thank you for asking about that. I have been fascinated with intuition for about 6 years now. And funny enough, actually the first tattoo I ever got 6 years ago was a tattoo of intuition on my forearm, just to remind myself that the analytical ability that before I saw as the pinnacle of human intelligence might actually not be, and that there's this more sophisticated thing. And so, I was always someone that was good at school. I was a youth chess master. I was a Mensa member. So I had a lot of identity, I would say, invested in being the smart one. Also, like a little bit, I was comfortable with being the nerd. That was my thing. And then after my first intensive breath meditation and yoga training that I talked about before, that was back in 2020, something very interesting happened. So as I went deeper into the practice, I noticed that a cognitive ability or cognitive quality emerged that was distinctly different from this linear analytical processing that I was used to. And suddenly, instead of explicitly thinking through scenarios and literally talking through scenarios in my head and like going through these like explicit reasoning chains in my head, I would just get this calm, deep sense of knowing that arrived seemingly out of nowhere and literally just dropped into my body.
Mm-hmm.
Often also at odd times where I wasn't thinking about the issue at all. I was doing something else. I'm having a walk. I'm taking a shower. And so I would say for me, intuition is this clear, deep sense of knowing that arrives without thinking and also without emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no step-by-step analysis. There is no visible deduction chain. There is no talking in your head. But also there's no emotional charge. No like or dislike. It just appears and you feel that it's deeply true.
Yeah.
And for me personally, it often arrives with a sense of alignment, resonance, and also kind of an expansive inner peace. And then, of course, the emotional or mental reaction usually comes after. That's where the mind kicks in. It's like, you're crazy. This doesn't fit the plan. It's like, you can't leave your executive career behind. What are you doing? You're losing it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that like peace is there all the time. But in that moment, when that knowing drops, there's the sense of peace before your mind chatter comes back online. So this is my personal definition of intuition. It's not an official one. And I actually don't think that there is a official definition of intuition that we all agree on. And we kind of like throw the word intuition around as if we mean the same thing, but we don't.
Yeah.
And I first noticed this when I started digging into the science, because I was like, okay, what does science say about this? Or how does science understand the process of intuition? And when I looked at the research and their definitions, I was like, wait a minute, like this is something totally different than what I understood it to be. It's like totally different.
Yeah.
And so then as I started mapping it, like I came up with this understanding that really helped me to distinguish between 3 layers.
Yeah.
And I would define these as the first one, which is the most basic one, fast pattern intuition. The second one, deep insight intuition. And the third one, which is the top level, transpersonal intuition. And so the fast pattern intuition is what neuroscience mostly focuses on. The brain and nervous system are constantly encoding patterns. They're building a library of this. This kind of situation tends to lead to that outcome.
Yeah.
And then when a similar situation appears, the system recognizes it in a fraction of a second and surfaces a judgment without this conscious chain of reasoning. So it's fundamentally just pattern recognition.
Yeah.
But it's like an extremely fast processing on an unconscious level. And this is what is thought to underlie instant expert judgment, for example, in firefighting, medicine, chess, business, or the traders on the Wall Street that listen to their gut. This was fundamentally research on this basic layer of this fast pattern intuition. The second level, the deep insight intuition, is the thing that shows up in those before and after moments, I would describe it. So think of creative breakthroughs or life decision or scientific insights, one-of-a-kind inventions that completely break with the paradigm, with the whole framework of an industry, for example. And research actually suggests that they're usually preceded by long periods of immersion and frustration. And during these periods, the brain is kind of quietly reorganizing the problem in the background until suddenly a coherent solution crystallizes and pops into awareness as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think you could probably see a lot of the artistic masterpieces here. A lot of the really accomplished artists, for example, I have just Lenny Kravitz on top of my mind. I saw an interview with him and he's talking openly about, I'm not writing this music. It's like, I'm just the antenna. I'm just writing down these pieces are coming to me as a whole. So basically, he's downloading them.
Yeah.
So I think among creative people, this is quite common, that they also feel that the masterpiece is coming to them as a whole, and they don't even feel like an author of that.
Yeah.
And I think a second field where that's quite common is in science, or the really big scientific breakthroughs or the inventions, thinking of Nikola Tesla or Albert Einstein, etc. So the theories that they have conceptualized or the concepts that they came up with were so far beyond what they were able to prove at that point even.
Yeah.
And so this is kind of this like massive creative breakthroughs. And I think so also maybe to be clear, I don't think necessarily that the boundaries between these categories are so clear cut.
Yeah.
Because especially between the second and the third one, I think it gets a little bit blurry. With the third one, I would talk about transpersonal intuition, where there is this layer of, so this is the layer that the spiritual and indigenous traditions emphasize most. And current, I would say mainstream science currently struggles with, or honestly largely ignores. And here intuition is described as receiving accurate information or guidance that doesn't seem traceable to personal learning or ordinary perception, as if tuning into a larger field of intelligence. And science doesn't really have the tools to validate or invalidate those claims yet, so it mostly ignores them. But I think there are some examples where ignoring it just doesn't make sense. Like, for example, how were the ancient people thousands of years ago able to correctly visualize an atom? Like,
Yeah.
they didn't have the
Yeah.
instruments to actually look at that. So where did that come from? And yeah, so I think all three layers are real in lived experience. The first two are increasingly studied by science, and the third one is still largely mapped only by wisdom traditions. And is honestly the one that I'm most interested in.
Yeah, and I feel like this ties back also to consciousness, because I feel like this is one of the things where I think the third layer of intuition can possibly be explained when we have a better understanding of consciousness. Because coming back to Christoph Koch, he took DMT MO5, so it's most potent. It's almost, you get a near-death experience, and up to this point he was not sure where consciousness was coming from. He was also not sure that it's a byproduct of the complexity of our brain, and because he is like an opponent of the integration information theory, and then he had this experience, and he was like, "That's so odd, because I became the universe, and I was not. There was no Christoph anymore, but I was conscious. How did that happen?" And so he experienced certainly things that are totally out of his experience of what he should witness in his life. And one thing in particular, and this is also very interesting, you introduced me to Luke, right? And he spent time with the Kogi, right? And funny enough, when I spoke with Luke, I told him like, "Hey, I know the Kogi," and we didn't know that he was going there. And I basically told the story that I was at this event. This was like ancient technology and modern technology. So we were talking about the ancients, and we were talking about AI. And so there was these indigenous people from South America, and basically they have like also their special people that are like considered as shamans, and they grow up in total darkness for years and years and years. And they spoke about this one guy that could map stars systems, and he had a discussion with an astronomer, and then he was like, "Okay, there's this star system," and then this guy coming from the Kogi, he said, "No, these are two stars. The only reason you don't see the other stars is the gravitational field is not showing up." And he was like, "Yeah, how should he know? He's clearly speaking from whatever." And then so he tried to solve it, and he looked up the evidence, and turned out he was correct. So this guy that had no access to a telescope or whatever knew there was a hidden star behind this other star. And this goes directly to that. And I feel like we probably as human have like a potential or something that we can tap into that is maybe at this point of time not totally understood how the brain does it. And but I feel like we probably all have it in our life, that we have this moments where we cannot understand it, how this happened, but we were tapping into something, and whatever it is, it's working. And I feel like the more you have these experience, the more you believe there is something more. And as you mentioned, like you had like special experience in meditation. I had also a couple of very special experience, which are not like totally explainable by consciousness, but because it remains subject, it's hard to, let's say, convey it to a broader audience, or to convey it to everybody else when they don't have the experience. And there is even one more thing that is even more striking, is these people who have experiences with psychedelics, they all have certain commonalities in experiences, which is also like everybody experienced, I think, the dome. And funny enough, when they the people speak about, yeah, I have seen that dome, and you hadn't had a psychedelic experience, they don't know what you're talking about. But whenever somebody else had also the psychedelic experience, they know exactly what you're talking about. So either it's something that we all have, or we all access to something that is very, very near to us. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I resonate a lot with what you're sharing, and I personally think it's a bit of a mix of arrogance and naivety to dismiss all of these realities or phenomena or alternative explanations for how these come to be, just because they don't fit this tight box of what our analytical mind can understand.
Yeah, that is so true. And I feel like it's also the same analogy, like when you say, okay, I just use everything cognitively and disregard my bodily sensations. It's like you are missing a completely additional information system and think that this is the only way to solve any problem. And I feel that it's also coming from ignorance in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you as well, and this is also based on the things I have read on your Substack, is you have a very particular and interesting opinion about AI. And I want to really pick your brain on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I am quite fascinated by the current developments in AI, both in terms of the opportunity that the technology is providing, as well as the challenges that come from that, and the implications for us as humans in particular. And I think it's interesting that as AI is now starting to take over more and more of the cognitive tasks that historically have been considered kind of like the peak of human cognitive ability, right? Like the analysis, the pattern recognition, etc. It's most of what has been understood as valuable in the business context. Suddenly, it's becoming completely commoditized.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is, of course, an opportunity to that, in the sense that if we can outsource that to machines that can do it on a much larger scale, for example, pattern recognition or crunching through millions of data points, it allows us to accelerate a lot of the research and, like interesting developments in technology and science. And on the other hand, I think it's also coming with the question, well, if AI takes over that, what is there left for us as humans?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a question that we should be seriously asking ourselves. And I think it's both, or I would say the increasing adoption of AI is both creating the opportunity to explore that deeper, because hopefully it is creating a little bit more time and space for us to actually focus on the development of deeper human abilities. And at the same time, I think it's creating the necessity, because we can't, ignore the reality that our basic cognitive abilities are being commoditized.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is in many ways creating the next frontier in exploring human abilities, and exploring particularly human abilities that go beyond this basic linear analytical cognition. And I think this wonderfully ties back to what we were talking about before, about this mind-body connection and embodied condition, interoceptive awareness, somatic awareness, because I fundamentally believe that a lot of the higher order human abilities that are uniquely human and are likely to stay uniquely human and not compete with machines are actually emerging when we are deeply connected with our bodies. And I would say the main categories of the abilities that I see are, first of all, an expanded perceptive ability. So the ability to perceive beyond the explicit, the implicit, the tacit, what is not being said, the energy in the room, the emotional states of people, perceiving the facial micro expressions, etc., or deeper perception on an energetic level. And I think we can both expand the resolution of what we can perceive through our basic five senses. We can literally see and hear more and notice more and perceive in a more panoramic way, so that when I'm talking to someone in a meeting, I'm fully focused on them. And at the same time, I can also capture this activity in my periphery of people maybe like swimming around in their chair or something. And so I think that this expanded perceptive ability and more attunement to the implicit is fundamentally going to be a frontier of higher human ability. Then I think there are the what I would describe as higher order cognitive abilities going beyond this linear analytical thinking. I would place true creativity and unique original insight into that bucket. I would definitely place intuition into that bucket, probably on all three levels that we have talked about, but in particular the level 2 and level 3, where it's really connected to this creative breakthroughs or receiving information that seems to be coming from a higher source. And then I think also there is this bucket of wisdom and morality that, from my perspective, will have to stay a human domain. Of course, machines can prepare a lot of the decisions in that field, but ultimately, I think morality and ethical judgment are qualities that need to be embodied by humans, and I think need to be also, or the decisions in that field need to be governed by humans.
I see that very similar. I also feel like, although there are negative aspects of AI coming our way, I still believe like these aspects are now very clear, because before it was more that we didn't pay too much attention. One way is, for instance, like the education system comes more and more into pressure, which I believe it's probably outdated for a very, very long time. And I see that too as a possibility to like really further develop like these higher cognitive abilities that maybe need more time to develop or tune into. But I feel like if we can use it as an opportunity for growth, we will end up to be in a better place. Just you mentioned, like we, through this like ability of AI to process large amounts of data, will help us like creating better like data or insights that fundamentally can be used by a human to determine like what is the outcome, how we should interpret this, or should we judge it, how can we use that kind of data or insights and apply it to maybe an algorithm, or use it to implement something else. And so I feel like if we use it as a tool that serves us and help us to amplify our cognition, then I think we are up to a very great next couple of maybe 50 years, even next generations. However, I think at the same token, I'm also sometimes worried about certain developments, but I think the technology is not going the way. It's more how we are going to use this technology at the end.
Yeah, and I think discernment is going to be key for us both individually and on a societal level. And I think, like I see two, I would say, important things to keep in mind for all of us as we engage with AI. The first one is that it's extremely important that we don't get lazy and outsource all of our thinking to the machines just because we can, and that we don't like write every email with ChatGPT and write every blog post and every LinkedIn post and everything and every strategy deck with ChatGPT. Like, of course, like in some cases it makes sense. It saves us time. It allows us to produce more in a shorter amount of time, etc. But we need to stay mindful of engaging enough so we can, first of all, maintain our cognitive ability. And one of the things that I have to say I'm significantly worried about, because I see that a lot of people are very careless engaging with the technology. They're like, oh my God, this is so convenient. It's like ChatGPT is doing everything for me. Like, I don't have to struggle with writing. I don't have to write my own emails. And this is a downward slope, because I think our body is a master at adaptation. And if you don't use it, you lose it. If we don't use our muscles, we use our muscles. If we don't use our brain, we use the cognitive ability. And so I am very worried about a massive wave of neurodegenerative disease coming at us at ages never seen before. And I see a certain kind of similarity between what happened with metabolic disease as we started consuming ultra-processed foods. Suddenly, diabetes too started getting diagnosed in 8-year-old kids, 10-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And I think over-relying on AI is nothing else than ultra-processed food for our brain. Like, our brain needs to chew. Otherwise, we lose the ability. And so I am worried that without discernment and education about how important it is to stay cognitively engaged and not get lazy, we will see a similar wave of neurodegenerative disease affecting younger and younger populations. So I think this is the first thing to think about, is just, first of all, to defend and maintain our cognitive ability.
Yeah.
And then from there is the next level where we can actually start thinking about and working towards expanding our human ability into these areas that I described before, where we can actually leverage the technology that is saving us, hopefully, time, and not just creating more distraction and more busy work, which is another thing maybe to pay attention to or to be aware of, but to use that time to actually invest into reconnecting with our body, into the right type of practice that helps us expand beyond and expand our creative ability, intuitive ability, our interpersonal ability, and so on.
Yeah, I see that. And I agree with you on a lot of things. I think as well that we will see certain conditions that will, as a result of over reliance on AI, and also like being constantly on the phone and all these different things, and also our dopamine system is attacked in a way. But on the other hand, it's like I think this is we always had it as human, that we have to learn to be responsible for the things that we create on the one hand, and on the other hand, what makes me cheerful and also positive is I see more and more people creating technology that is human aligned, human centric. And I believe as well that, and this is one of my reasons why I started all of this, is because I saw this wave of new set of problems, in that sense that I said, okay, what we need is now a mental gym, basically, because we had the same shift with physical gym. For 20 years, it was kind of strange and fringe to be in the gym. Now everybody does it because we are not used anymore to move like we used to move before. So I think the great thing is that we have this innate ability to innovate and create something new. And so I rather focus on that and seek out the people that do this, so we end up at a better place.
I still believe that there is a path to a better place.
Yeah, I believe that too. To wrap it up, what are the 3 things that you can recommend to somebody starting in corporate into their day, so they can have the benefits of a regulated nerve system?
Yeah, so I would say I would first start with the basics, and we all know what these are. I'm not saying anything new. Eat well, sleep enough, exercise, go outside, get some sunlight in the morning, and treat rest as part of your performance regimen. I would say that's the very basics, just to get to a healthy baseline of nervous system that then allows for a good cognitive function and also a balanced emotional state. And then I would say beyond that, what I would really recommend is to actually start looking into some of these ancient wisdom traditions, because they have been working on the expansion of human consciousness for centuries, some of them millennia, and there is a really deep wealth of wisdom, and it's not just theoretical. Like, they have very concrete embodied tools and maps how to expand your ability and expand your consciousness. And it doesn't really matter if you follow the Buddhist tradition or the yogic tradition or whichever tradition you pick. I think it is something that it's time to start taking more seriously on a collective level and rediscover that ancient wisdom for ourselves.
What a word. That was really great. Thank you so much for the summary, and thank you in general. Lucia, I had a great time talking to you.
Thank you so much, Rudi, for having me. I really enjoyed this, and thank you again.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.